ora, I'm Erica Wilkinson, and this is the Doc Sounds of Science podcast. Kia ora, ko Erica Wilkinson tēnei. He konei I purangi tēnei e pa ana ki ngā Sounds of Science. Every episode, we talk about work being done behind the scenes by Doc's technical experts, scientists, rangers, and the experts in between. Kia ora koutou katoa, hello to you all. Today we're talking to one of our technical advisors who takes her work home with her in a really literal sense, Cassie Mealey. Some people knit, some people rebuild old cars or follow a sports team. Cassie rehabilitates penguins in her backyard. Hi, Cassie.
Hello, Erica.
Welcome to the show. Would you like to introduce yourself to our listeners?
Kia ora, ko Cassie ho, ko mātanga mātai, horopi taku mahi. Hi, I'm Cassie and I'm a technical advisor for terrestrial fauna.
Kia ora. Now, my first question is, what does a technical advisor fauna do at Doc?
A variety of things. A few of us are specialised in certain fauna like invertebrates or bats or lizards. For me, I've specialised in being a generalist, which I quite like. So I work across all these things. So bats, lizards and birds. So I provide guidance to the department on their conservation programs or on permits to handle and capture wildlife for research or development, and also give advice on managing fauna for resource consents, that kind of thing.
And when you say fauna, can you tell me what's the difference between flora and fauna?
So when you think of flora, think floral or flowers, and that's a plant. And then fauna is animals.
So what does an average day look like for you? It sounds like there's a lot of variety in that.
Yeah, true. It can be very varied. So in the field season or our summer season, when our animals are out and about, we're looking to monitor them. So it could be a helicopter to the top of a mountain range in Haast, dropped off looking for a kiwi or its chicks or its eggs, just to make sure it's all healthy. I could be stomping around in a swamp for 5 days looking for really endangered lizards. Or I could be waking up at 3:30 in the morning to go catch some bats. So that's my field days. And then on the winter, I guess, time or the downtime in between field days, I'm at my desk reviewing a lot of reports, writing reports and giving advice on other things.
Oh, wow. And waiting until the summer time comes when you can get out
Pretty
there
much.
again. Awesome. And how did you come to be at Doc? How'd you get here?
Yeah, well, I'm a bit of an import. So I'm a vagrant from Australia who's naturalised in New Zealand. I quite like it here. It's cool, but it's very different. But I started off doing conservation work in Australia, dabbled in mostly birds and waders, and then I went to Mauritius and spent some time there working with all sorts of things, lizards and birds, which coincidentally they have a similar setup to New Zealand. It's an island. They never had any native mammals besides bats, and they've got a similar stoat-like predator. So it's a really interesting concept. Wow. So I was there for a bit working with those kind of creatures, and then I came to try something else, and I was thinking about keeping that kind of warm latitude of like tropical. I was thinking maybe I go to Costa Rica, and I applied for a few jobs around the world, and I got the one in Haast, and I was like, I don't know about this, but I actually really loved it.
Oh, wow. And you've just come from the Mauritius and, okay.
Yeah.
Very different
Warm
situations.
waters, yeah.
What an experience.
Yeah. I mean, I think the two magic words that got me here were helicopters and jet boats and kiwi. And I was like, I can do that. I'll be there.
And now look at your role. That's amazing. It sounds like you get to do that all the time. So what kind of things would you think would be the same across countries in terms of conservation that just wasn't? Are there any examples like that?
Yeah. I think the one that's really stark to me is lizards. So I work with lizards in Australia, and, they come from typically hot, dry climates. They lay eggs. They do all the normal lizardy things. I come to New Zealand, and they're so weird. They're very different. They live in cold, wet places like Fiordland. They live in the snow in the alpine zone. They don't lay eggs. They give birth to live young like mammals do. It's so strange here. And they can have pregnancies that last over multiple years. They can live up to like 50. It's so weird, but it's great. I love it.
Can we go back to the pregnancies slowing down? What was that?
Yeah. So the lizards that live in the alpine zones, I've got quite a few alpine geckos. They live in cold temperatures. And so their pregnancies appear to last for over 2 years, which is quite a long time. Usually it's only a few weeks. Yeah, you're like, no, this is not for me. I'm not signing up for this.
Don't bring me back as a lizard.
Yeah. I don't know how they do it either. But we think they kind of go into like a torpor, like over winter, which a few other animals do, where their like heart rate slows down, their metabolism slows down, so that development of the embryo would slow down too. That kind of goes into a stasis where, you know, the pause button's pressed, and then when they come back into summer, spring, it'll start developing again. But it's crazy. 2 years of pregnancy, and they can give birth to multiple young at once, live.
Oh my gosh, tiny little lizards.
Tiny little lizards just born, running around instantly.
And have you always done wildlife rehabilitation?
Yeah. I started off in Australia working with a wonderful person who does wildlife rehab down there in Melbourne. We did all sorts of things. We get little bird penguins there too. So penguins and bats and birds and frogs and lizards. So we did all sorts of stuff, which was really cool. But I think my mum would tell you that I've been bringing stuff home since I could walk and catch things. So
she knew
I'm just like happen. More qualified. Yeah.
You know what it's called now. Now I know a bit about your work with haast, kiwi and penguins, but I know that's also the tip of the iceberg. What are some of the other native species that you've rehabilitated since you were able to walk?
Well, in New Zealand or around the world, what are we talking about here?
Ooh, I'm going to choose New Zealand to start, and then maybe go global.
Cool. So in New Zealand, we get things like kahu or harrier hawks, the Australasian harrier, come through. And that often happens from what seems to be like a car strike. So you often see them feeding on a dead animal on the road, a carcass, and they have a bit of trouble taking off. They can't take off that fast. So if people aren't slowing down, there's kind of that slow motion of the bird just struggling to take off, and sometimes they carry on, like the thing it's eating will get stuck in its claws and it's got to drag this dead possum or something with it, and so it's quite slow and gentle takeoff, and then the cars might come through and just collect it. So we get fractured bones through that and some other injuries. So yeah.
What else have you rehabilitated?
I think one of the funny ones are drunk keridu that come through, the wood pigeon.
What?
So, have you heard of this?
I've seen articles, I guess, but tell me about it.
Yeah, right. So at a certain time of year, keridu will be feeding on really, really ripe fruit. And if they have enough ripe fruit in their crop, which is like their pre-stomach, they just kind of fill up their pre-stomach with all these beautiful ripe fruits, and they sit in the sun. And in the warmth of the sun, their crop just kind of ferments their fruit and it turns into alcohol, and they just get a little bit steamy from it all.
Oh, no. Is it dangerous for them?
Yeah, well, they can fall out of trees. They can't really fly very well. So I guess the risk is when they're falling out of trees or ending up on the ground, they can't take off again. They can come into contact with predators, dogs, cats, stoats, that kind of thing.
Okay. So yeah, what's the rehab that you do there? Is it like, I don't think we do stomach pumps anymore. What do you do?
No. Well, I'll give them fluids, which involves putting a tube down the back of their throat into their crop and giving them some fluids that way. So rehydrating, rest, recovery, checking them for injury, that kind of thing.
Wow. Okay. Any other wildlife you want to tell us about rehabilitating?
It just really depends. I mostly do with penguins and seabirds. So we get every year we get the Westland petrel on the west coast here, where the juveniles are taking off for their first flight, and they seem to get really distracted by the big lights in the main city areas, and they end up what we call becoming grounded. So they fly down to the ground. We're not quite sure what's happening there, but we think they navigate by like the stars or the moon, and so they're kind of drawn to the lights, and it draws them down to the ground, and then they end up hitting the ground. And these birds have these massive wings, and they can't take off from the ground. They can't push off. So we end up collecting a whole bunch of Westland petrels or taiko for about 2 weeks every year after they've just fledged and are flying off, and we have to help them back up to a high place to gain flight again.
Oh, good on you. You've worked with Kia as well, right? What's the most amazing thing you've seen Kia do?
Yeah, Kia are super intelligent. I quite like them. And they're amazing to watch. I was doing a Kia catching trip one time, helping out with the Kia team, who are amazing at what they do and incredibly fit, walking up these mountains every day. But I was up this mountain with them. We were trying to catch some Kia. We had this Kia catching mat out, which is a bit of mat with a really fun, funky thing in the middle that really attracts Kia. They love novel things usually. Oh. And on the mat, we've got a whole lot of kind of knots or nooses to try and catch them in. So they might walk through and get their leg caught in a noose, and that's how we catch them. And so we were sitting there, we saw this Kia flying around, and we got our binos out, our binoculars, and looked up, and we could see it had a leg band on, so it had been caught before and had been banded. And they don't normally get caught twice, but this one landed right by the mat and proceeded to sidestep every noose knot that was on the map and then pull it closed with its beak, just pulling the knots closed, and then it flew off.
How does it know? So clever. Has it been watching the other ones and been like, oh, Barry, what are you doing?
Yeah. Not again, Bazza.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Just he must have remembered. I don't know. So
yeah. And what's the worst the worst thing that you've seen a Kia do?
Kia get into all sorts of mischief, but I think the worst thing for them would be eating lead. And this is lead from carcasses that have been shot, or from lead flashings or nails in huts and houses. And I hope no one's eaten lead, but for a bird it's quite sweet tasting, and it's quite a flexible metal. So I imagine it's quite fun to play with, and it's tasty. So they get amongst it all and have a bit of a chew. And that ends up with lead poisoning in Kia. So the lead gets into the bloodstream, and you might see some wobbly Kia around. They can't fly very good. They're often emaciated, and that can be due to the lead poisoning, and it can be quite a slow thing. So sometimes we get Kia handed in with the lead poisoning, and the best thing we can do for them, and we can cure it, which is great if we catch it early enough. So we've got a few wildlife hospitals here that are amazing, like the South Island Wildlife Hospital and the Dunedin Wildlife Hospital, that will do this thing called chelation therapy, which takes the lead out of the bloodstream. So just lie the Kia down, put a vein in its wing, and insert this chemical into the bloodstream, which clings on to the lead in the blood, and then that makes its way. This combined now molecule makes its way out through the urine of the bird. It's just excreted in its pee.
That sounds like an incredible discovery. Wicked. I'm so glad that's happening. Now, we said up top that you rehabilitate penguins in your backyard. Can we talk a bit about that? What is it that you're doing in your spare time?
Yeah. So it's one of my favourite things to do, although it's a lot of hard work. There's a lot of poo, a lot of fish, a lot of stinky stuff. But it's all worth it when you can release the penguin on the beach. So walking through the process, I guess, when a bird comes in, a penguin, I'll go through a physical assessment, so checking for any injuries, any internal, external signs of injury that I can see. We'll check for dehydration, give it an assessment of body condition to see if it's really skinny or if it's too fat or what's going on. And then the first step is always to give it fluids. So I think a lot of people out there think that the best thing you can do for an injured animal is to feed it, and that's actually the worst thing you can do. What can happen is that if they've been dehydrated and haven't eaten for a while, their organs start to shut down. And if they're really dehydrated, they're missing their key electrolytes. And when you put food in their stomach, it kickstarts that organ again, but it draws all the electrolytes from their body that is like keeping their heart going, that sort of thing, and their brain to the stomach. And then that can just really cause organ failure left, right, and centre. And it's not a good outcome. So what I do, and this is why we should really get animals to care as soon as possible, we get them fluids first for the first 24 hours or 2 days. Get that potassium levels and electrolyte levels back up to normal. And then we can start slowly reintroducing food, because they haven't eaten for a while, right? So we're not going to just give them a solid piece of fish or whatever. So we'll start with some fish broth, and then maybe go to like a fish smoothie. So this is where my blender gets all yucky with all the fish that I drop in there and just whizzes it up. My house stinks all the time I go to a penguin.
For the greater good.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, totally. For the greater good. Yeah, and then also introduce solid bits of fish after that, and then a whole fish to fatten him up. Yeah, so it's quite a process. We go from physical assessment to fluids to reintroducing food. We'll have them on pain relief and medication straight away. And then once we're getting them fattened up and ripe, we're going to put them in the pool and do some swim training and make sure that they're strong enough, fit enough to go back in the wild.
You do swimming training with penguins?
Swimming training, yeah. So I've got a pool in my backyard. It's kind of like a Kmart blue kind of setup pool that you can buy, and you get a few kids and your family. I just put in my backyard for my penguin and plop her in there, and she goes for a swim. Loves it. Yeah.
Okay, now before everyone goes to Kmart and gets a pool and goes and looks for penguins, do you need a permit to do this? Do you need training to do this? Can I do it, please?
Really, we want people to be qualified. It's quite a process. We're talking about fluids, and we can give those with injections or with tubes down their throat, so it's quite risky, and there's a risk of aspirating if you try and give the food the wrong way, so breathing in the fluid into the lungs as opposed to into the stomach, so it's quite finicky. So we really want a trained person to be doing this, and also the same for physical assessments and that sort of thing. And so I've been doing this for over 5 years now, between Australia and New Zealand, and I've got a whole team of people who support me, and I'm still learning. Like, I still feel like I don't know much, and so I'm constantly referring to other rehabilitators. I'm part of REN, so the Wildlife Rehabilitation Network of New Zealand. I'm in contact with vets around New Zealand who specialise in wildlife care. So I'm always on the phone to them, checking that what I'm doing is okay, or sending animals to them for specialised care. So it's really quite an involved process. And I encourage people to get this training and volunteer if you're really interested. Please give it a go. It's great fun. A lot of work, but great fun and really rewarding. But it definitely needs some expertise.
Yes, so just to emphasise, no, you can't do it without a permit and training. Cassie is an authorised rehabilitator. Stop going and finding penguins by yourself, audience, please.
But if you do, hand them to me.
Or call Cassie or the South Island Wildlife Hospital. Yeah, they do great work as well. Yeah. Now, tell us about the most recent penguin rescue that you did.
All right. So this was a Tawaki, a Fiordland crested penguin. So they're my favourite. So these are the...
Are you allowed to have favourites?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Just between us.
Sure.
So they're like about 60 centimetres tall. They're black and white. They look like they're wearing a tuxedo, so a black back, that white front, and they've got these awesome yellow eyebrows that stick up from their head, which kind of makes them a little bit angry at the same time. And every penguin has its own personality that comes in, and it's just so much fun learning about them, like their likes, their dislikes, their personality. So the last one I had, we named Odette, and I had her for about 5 weeks all up. So she came in, she was just found about 100 metres from my house on the beach, just sitting there looking not the greatest. And so we brought her in, did a health check on her, and she was dehydrated and very skinny, underweight, and had lost all her waterproofing in her feathers. So the penguins have a super cool oil gland, the back of their body around their bum, and they will get this with their beak, and they'll rub this oil all through their feathers when they're preening. But when they're getting really sick or unwell or dehydrated or skinny, that just kind of stops working. The glands shut down, they're not preening as much, they don't have enough energy to do that, and they lose that waterproofing coating. And, I mean, if you've been swimming in the ocean out here, it's pretty cold around these waters. So to get soaked to the skin and to the bone would be really damaging for them. So we took her in. She came back to my, let's call it a penguin haven with a pool and an enclosure. And we fixed her up. So we did that whole journey of doing the fluid therapy, physical assessment, feeding her up with fish broth, then our stinky fish smoothies, and then solid fish. And so I'm going out and like catching fish in the rivers to feed her. They can eat a lot. Like,
really?
So she can weigh up to 4 kilos. Yeah. And she could be eating 800 grams of fish a day, which is almost a kilo of fish a day. It's a lot of work.
But, well, I guess she was hungry as well. Like, it's been a while, right? She's making up for lost time. I have to ask, what do your neighbours think?
Yeah, right. So actually, I haven't discussed this with them, but I know that they probably can smell the penguin poo, the fish. They could probably hear her doing her squawks. I don't know what they think, to be honest, but I'm glad I haven't had any complaints.
No noise control yet.
No. I do feel bad for people walking past my house. Like, even on the street walking past, you get this whiff of bird, penguin, seabird smell mixed with fish. It's kind of dank, dirty smell. It's bad, but I'm terribly used to it at the time. So when I have friends over, I'm just like, I'm so sorry.
I wonder if they know that you've got penguins and that's what you do. What's something that you learned about penguins from having them just hanging out in your backyard that you would never have learnt otherwise?
Yeah, the first thing I noticed, which was obvious but at the same time mind-blowing because I hadn't thought about it before, but wild animals have never encountered or don't usually encounter a full physical boundary. So putting her in my penguin enclosure, she just went around the whole way around, tapping it, pecking it, kicking it, being like, there must be a hole in here somewhere that I can get out of. And then she'd go around and she'd start jumping up higher. Must be up higher that I can get out. And then I could just see her thinking about, like, what's going on here? And then I would, like, come into her enclosure through the door, but she had never seen a door before, right? So to her, I'm just appearing in her cage. And she's like, where did you come from? And she'd, like, go behind me and try and figure out, where did you come from? There's a hole in here. There's a hole in here somewhere. It took her about 4 days to figure out how a door worked, but then she got it. She's so smart. And the same thing happened when I put her in the pool. And so, like, being in the ocean, right, there's always a way out. You go deeper, or you go north, or you go south, or you go back onto the land. And so I put her in the pool, and she's like diving down. She's like, I'll just get out this way. And then she kind of hits the barrier. And she's like, oh, no. And then she dives down and hits the barrier. And she's like, oh, no. The poor thing. Didn't take her long. I felt so bad.
No, like, again, greater good. Are there times when, once she's figured out and, like, sussed it, that she, like, does she vocalize? Does she make noises that are, like, happy?
Yeah, once she's, like, figured out that what the deal is with the pool, especially in the pool, that was her favourite place, she did these things, what I called happy honks, and she'd just be swimming away and preening herself, and then she'd let out this big, like, honk! And she'd be like, I'm so happy right now, and it's quite loud. Apologies, neighbours, again.
Oh, that's pretty heartwarming. Oh, boy.
Yeah. At the same time, she did have, like, she's very good at letting you know, and they all are, when, like, you're up in her grill and she's not happy about it. So if you get up in her face, she'll let out this, like, massive squawk, and it's like an ongoing, getting louder and louder squawk, and she's, like, in your face, just being like, get out of my face. And I'm like, this is really intimidating right now. I really go back into your cage.
That's what we want, like, for her when she's independent out in the great outdoors.
Exactly.
Feisty. Good on her.
Yeah.
So speaking of penguins in the outdoors, when they get back from their beautiful holiday with you, what are the main threats that they're facing?
Yeah, so the main threats for them would be on land. So they're on land for breeding at a certain time of year and for molting when they get a new suit, essentially. So all their old feathers fall off and they get new feathers coming through. So the changing of the suit, the molting time. So those are the two times that they're on land, and they're exposed to predators, so stoats for the chicks and dogs. So that's our pressures on land. And for at sea, we're finding that more we're studying where penguins go and forage and get their fish, there's an overlap with where they're fishing and where humans are fishing. And that can be an issue when using things like set nets and trawling, and penguins can get caught up in these nets. And what happens is they need to come to the surface to breathe every so often. They can't hold their breath forever, but they get held underwater and they get caught up in these nets and end up drowning. There's a bit of a conflict going on there. And then the third thing I think that would be an issue that we're still not entirely sure how it's going to affect penguins, but would be climate change. So this can end up in lower productivity waters, so less food resources. But what can also happen is when you get a warmer water coming through, the fish that want to stay cooler will go deeper into the ocean. And penguins have like a maximum dive depth that they can physically dive to and hold their breath for. And if their fish are below that dive depth, then they're going to end up not feeding. And so that's a potential that we're looking into.
Okay, gosh, so much to think about. All right, we've had some wonderful listener questions come through. So these are kind of quick fire. If you can answer them, we'll do like a quick fire round. Ready, steady, go. Is there penguin aversion training for dogs like there is Kiwi aversion training?
That's a great question. And I know on the west coast of the South Island there is. The lady who does this does penguin training as well. And so I would say go ask your local dog aversion training dog person if they can do penguins as well. It's just a matter of getting some samples together to enable that. So feathers, some poo, some smelly stuff, that kind of thing.
Oh, is that how they do it? Okay. Are you finding more penguins with ingested plastic around nowadays?
Personally, I haven't, and I haven't necropsied the penguins, but I think the Dunedin Wildlife Hospital has found some, and there's a risk that seabirds' parents are feeding it to their chicks. So it's definitely an issue.
Definitely there. And how are New Zealand penguins different to other penguins around the world?
They're just the best.
No bias.
No bias at all, yeah. Well, we have 2 of the top 3 most endangered penguins in the world are New Zealand penguins. So the third at the moment is the Tawaki, the Fiordland crested penguin. And then the hoiho, the yellow-eyed penguin. And then the other one that sits in that category of top 3 is the Galapagos penguin, the tropical penguin. Penguins are weird. But they also, the New Zealand penguins breed in really rugged ground. So from South Westland through to Fiordland, through Haast to Milford Sound and Stewart Island, they're breeding in these like dense forests. They're walking up the beaches, hopping over logs, getting themselves through Supplejack to get to their burrows. So it's quite a hike for them.
It's incredible.
So it's not like penguins in Antarctica on an iceberg. It's very different.
Okay, these guys are like intrepid travelers.
Yeah.
What's the most common penguin injury?
From what I have seen personally would have to be emaciation, so being really skinny and dehydrated. And lacerations, so cuts to the body can be the feet or their flippers, and we're not sure what's going on here, but what we think is happening is there might be encounters with things like barracuda, which sounds weird, it's just a fish, but if they're penguins, and this is a hypothesis, are feeding in boil-ups where there's fish everywhere and there's penguins feeding, and then there's other fish feeding on smaller fish and barracuda feeding on smaller fish. And barracuda can be quite bitey is what I understand. So they might be just nipping out whatever's nearby, and that might be a penguin leg, unfortunately.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, there's also potential shark bites in there. We've seen some big cuts across the stomach.
Oh, gosh.
So, yeah, poor things. It's not an easy life.
And what would you say is the single biggest obstacle to overcome to increase penguin numbers in mainland New Zealand?
I think there's 2 things. For land, protecting them from predators, so stoats and dogs, being aware of if you've got wildlife, where you're walking dogs, and that battle between fisheries and where penguins forage. So that overlap between human foraging and penguin foraging.
Okay. What you've covered don't feed penguins. What do people do that they think helps penguins that actually doesn't, and we need them to stop?
Yeah, that would be feeding penguins. Yeah, that
Cool.
would be the main one. Yeah.
If listeners take away one thing from this today, it is do not feed a penguin if you find it in the wild. That's not helping. Now, do different penguin breeds take different lengths of micro naps?
That's a great question, and I'm actually not too sure, but I know that the chinstrap penguins do this crazy thing where they micro nap for 4 seconds about like 10,000 times a day, and that's how they manage to, survive during parenting of chicks.
Oh my
so
God.
I don't know if that's something we could do.
Wow, we should learn.
Yeah, just like both hemispheres kind of shut down for 4 seconds and then they're back up again. I'm like,
4
and it just seems to work
seconds.
for them. Yeah.
Wow. It feels like there's like a really long blink or an actual nap. I'm not sure which one that is.
Yeah. Somewhere in between.
What's a really understated species that you think deserves more love from the public?
Oh, I love lizards, any kind of lizards, especially because New Zealand ones are so weird compared to the rest of the world. The whole, like, I'm happy to live in Fjordland on top of a mountain where it snows and it rains like 12 meters a year. And we're still constantly finding new species of lizards, of skinks and geckos, which I just thought, like, we'd explored every inch of the world by now, that this wasn't going to happen to me or in my lifetime. And here we are, just every kind of so often in New Zealand we find a new species of lizard, and it's not that uncommon.
So cool. Now, our last question, and I am going to read this one exactly. One listener asked, my 5-year-old James wants to know if they're taller than him or if they're like kokako.
I love that question.
So good. Thanks, James.
Penguins, so the tauki that I had is around 60 centimetres, and I think the hoiho, the yellow-eyed penguin, is a bit taller than it, maybe 65 centimetres. So let's just assume the average height of a 5-year-old boy is around 100 centimetres. So I think the penguin might come up to maybe its belly.
Okay.
Armpit, maybe? Yeah. So not quite as tall as James.
Cool. Thank you all for your listener questions. They were fantastic. Now, every time we post a penguin dog attack story on social media, so many people just refuse to believe that it was a dog. They always kind of argue about it. Have you encountered that kind of pushback?
To be honest, personally, I haven't, but I have seen it out there. And, you know, I can understand it in a way, which sounds weird coming from a conservationist, but I don't think a lot of dogs intend to kill these birds. Like I was saying before, like the penguins, you can smell them from the front of my house when you walk past. They're super stinky. All this bird smell, bird poo combined with fish, and it's just overwhelming smell. And this is fun for dogs to investigate these smells, right? And they're just so inquisitive. And so I think it must be an overwhelming pull to be like, what is this thing? And they probably never smelled something like a penguin before. It's not that common, right? And dogs investigate with their mouths as well, and they kind of play with their mouths, right? So they could pick up a penguin or a bird, and they can be quite soft-mouthed. But a shake can mean a broken neck for a penguin. Or if the penguin's kind of wiggling, they might just clamp down a little bit harder, which can mean a punctured lung for a penguin or any kind of bird. Some dogs are really good on recall, but when the reward, which might be something so novel and so stinky, is so great, they'll be like, Mum, not this time. I can't come back. I'm so sorry. I've just got to see what this is, and then put it in my mouth.
Yeah.
So when you're walking a dog on a beach, look ahead, scout out for wildlife. If you see some birds, maybe it's a good time to clip on your dog onto the lead and walk past the birds and then take it off again. Maybe call out to other people as you're passing them, hey, there's some penguins down there or there's some birds nesting, just letting you know. Be a responsible human, a good human, and then carry your dog's motivators with them. So, like, if they're really motivated by toys or treats or praise, you can maybe distract them that way and get them to recall with a toy, a treat, or some praise, then put them on the lead and walk past the distracting bird. Or get your dog a bird aversion trained and ask them about penguins if you're in a penguin area.
I feel like you've given us so many incredible facts already that, that this question, who knows what we'll come up with. But what is something about nature that just blew your mind when you learned it? We're calling these holy crap facts.
Holy crap facts. Well, for me, my facts change depending on what I've heard most recently. And just the other week, I learned that Pawilla Fanta, like New Zealand's carnivorous land snail, can live up to 30 years old. And I was just like, I can't imagine, well, like a life, 30 years as a snail. That must be fascinating. But it's kind of like everything in New Zealand lives a long time. This is one of the weird things about New Zealand. So like the kiwi bird can live to 60, probably 80. I've seen some birds in the wild that look 100, I swear. You know,
oh my
big,
gosh.
dry, scaly skin, some kind of sags under their eyes. You must be 100, which is very old. And then like the lizards here can live for a long time too. So I think we've quoted lizards, geckos in the wild over 40 years of age. We can look at their patterns and do photo ID based on their patterns. Yeah.
That's so cool.
Or Prolifanta, we can tag. We stick little numbers on their shell. And
Nice.
so we can see them grow over the years. Yeah.
Okay.
But I would say a few more fun facts if you've got some
Yes,
time.
please. Always.
Okay. So bats, I quite like bats. I did bat rehabilitation in Australia, and they're very intelligent. And so I know for fruit bats, those big microbats, they have the same 6 neural pathways as humans do, so that our brains are very similar. And I know we do a lot of studies on bats to figure out how our brain works too. Crazy. But they're very social, and so are we. So very similar, I guess, parts of the brain are working there. But as an example of this, with like New Zealand's microbats, the small ones that fit into the palm of your hand, very cute. Once we've caught them and we release them, they manage to find their way back to their colony, or the big roost. So they all kind of roost together in a tree during the breeding season. There might be like 100 bats in there. So I might have one over here, and the colony's over here somewhere, and they change roost tree every day. And so we release this bat maybe in the early hours of the morning while it's still dark, and it finds the rest of its colony to whatever tree it's like it is that day. How do they know what tree it is? I don't know. Have they like prearranged this when they like left the roost at dusk that day? I don't know. How do they know? Is it like on a schedule? I don't know.
Oh my gosh, is there a calendar on the inside of the roost wall?
Yeah.
Wow.
What are they doing?
So intelligent.
Yeah, and then that's for the long-tail bats, and for the short-tail bats, which are ones that forage on the ground, they're pretty awesome. They're real like chunky, meaty, aggressive bats, but tiny, so it's adorable. And my favorite thing about them is, well, you know how normal bats, when they open their wings, they've got like this skeleton with like the bones pointing down and the arm, and it's just kind of thin, and then a membrane. These short-tailed bats have little biceps because they use their elbows to like walk around on the ground. They've got biceps and shoulder muscles.
Jacked bats.
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
Jacked bats with lats.
Oh my gosh. What's something that happened in the field that still makes you laugh when you think about it? I feel like you're going to have a lot of these.
Actually, I have two for you, and I think the first one is generally picturing me trying to catch a kiwi that's running away. The Haas-Talkelwecker are really smart, very feisty. I love that about them. But they've learned the sound of a human. So when I get close, they'll start running away. Then the chase is on. And I can't run very fast or very well, especially like in a forest with logs. Yeah. Supplejack, rocks, slippery roots. So there's me like sliding all over the place, and then the kiwis, they're not really built to run either. So they're like kind of like fat bottom, chunky legged, long necked and beaked animal that just kind of like trip up over themselves and like in little tunnels here. It's a bit of a mess, and it's just a matter of like, if they fall over first, then I can catch them. But if I fall over first, it's like game over.
I can laugh at you.
Yeah, exactly.
You said you had two.
Right. So the second one would be doing a kiwi catching trip on Coal Island, which is an offshore island in Fiordland. This was with the Haas-Talkelwecker team. So they were spending 10 days on the island, and I came in halfway through on day 5, and they managed to get some sort of limited reception, or was it satellite phone, and they got in contact, and they were like, can you please bring lots of chocolate and chips? And I was like, okay, sure, like you must have eaten a lot already, like it must be pretty dire out there. And so I fly in and land, and they're like, thank you so much, thank you for chocolate and chips. And I didn't realize what had happened is that when they were going through the quarantine process for the island, they had 2 bins of food, week 1 and week 2. They take all the food out to quarantine it, put all the food back in, but the food went in different tubs, and all the chocolate and chips came in the second load and not the first. They'd been on the island for 5 days with no chocolate, no chips, no food motivators, and I was just craving it.
Oh, no motivators. Yeah. That was a tough week.
Yeah.
Speaking of things that you need to bring with you when you go into the field and not forget, do you have an unconventional or conventional essential item that you take with you always when working in the field?
I always take a full block of Whittaker's chocolate. That just gets me through. Like sometimes if you come out like from a big trudge around the forest or up and down a hill off track, and you're like coming out and like, I don't know, 2 hours to walk, I just need something to get me through, and you just hoe into a block of chocolate. And like it's a serious thing. I budget half a block of chocolate a day. So if I'm in there for 2 days, that's a full block. For 3 days, it's 2 blocks. You know, it's
2 block
serious
job.
business.
Yeah, no, I get
2 block
that.
job.
Definitely. You're such a passionate conservationist and so enthusiastic about it. It's pretty inspiring to see. Can you think of an instance where you saw something and it made you think, if everyone could see this, everyone would be a conservationist, everyone would be as passionate as you are?
Yeah, I think for me, and a few of my friends have seen this when they've come around to my house when I've had a penguin, is 2 things would be the happy honks I talked about when a penguin is in the water doing its thing and it's just like letting off this amazing happy honk. And the second thing would be like penguin parkour is what I'm calling it now. Penguins love to jump, and I love watching them jump, and they can jump really high. So they almost jump the entire height of themselves, so like close to 60 centimeters. So my little penguin will just run around the backyard, and I do have an enclosure, mind you. This is just for exercise and fitness. Mm-hmm. So when she's doing this, she's like hopping up on everything she can find, hopping down. And at one point she got up onto this. We have a series of like vertical logs that are like kind of stools in the backyard. And she got up onto them and was just like hopping from one to the next, and like it was big hops, like long jumps, feet out, flying through the air and then landing and then hopping again, and just like it was like a penguin parkour around my backyard onto rocks, logs, whatever she could find.
Oh my gosh. And not like trying to find food, but just like, this is what I do. This is an activity.
Yeah, this is what I do.
Yeah. Hey, is it when you have, kind of bonded with this penguin after 5 weeks with a field-and crested penguin with angry eyebrows, is it really hard to release them? Like tell me about that a little bit if you can.
It's a really complex emotional time.
Yeah.
So I'm like so happy and so stoked because they are always so ready and want to go back into the wild. So I can't wait to give that back to them.
Nice.
I'm also really relieved because it's a lot of hard work, a lot of boost.
Your neighbours are also relieved.
Yes. The noise and the smell will disappear soon. But then it's also really sad because I got to know it for so long, and we were like, it was like, we're best buds for a little bit.
Yeah.
And so it was it's a bittersweet moment. And I remember the last release, my housemate who was, she called herself Penguin Dad. So she was actually somewhat terrified of birds, but it's a prerequisite when you live with me that you have to be okay to help me with my birds. So she got really good. She was okay with the penguin until it squawked. Then she's like, I'm out of here. This is your job. I can't handle the intimidating squawks. And she could help me feed it and help me hold it. And so she came with me to the release, and we had this beautiful moment where we watched her happily skimp and jump into the water and swim out to sea. And we had this little moment, and I could see a bit of a tear on her face, and I was like just holding it together myself, and I was like, oh, it's so beautiful. I didn't tell this, and actually nobody knows this, but I did have a little cry afterwards.
I think that's nothing to be ashamed of. I think I'd be kind of, in tears, but that's such a good point to remember that they want to get back out there, and they would be thrilled to, not have an enclosure anymore. So
yeah. It's just so awesome to see them so happy where they belong.
Yeah. And what can people do at home to help penguins, people that are listening?
Yeah, so minimising their impacts on land. So with dogs, being aware of wildlife areas, so dogs on leads, or avoiding penguin areas during the breeding times and the molting times. And that will vary for your penguins. So just have a quick look on the website to check that. Doing some trapping, getting involved with trapping is great. So for stoats, check out your local community or volunteer organisation. You can volunteer with wildlife rehabilitation centres. They always need help, whether it's hands-on stuffs, scrubbing poo, finding towels, catching fish, whatever it is, fundraising, they always need help. So I encourage you to get involved.
Awesome. Cassie, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast today. This has just been Fantastic. We're very lucky to have you here in New Zealand working with our species. Kia ora.
Oh, kia ora. Thanks. It's been a pleasure to chat with you.
Thank you for listening. I'm your host, Erica Wilkinson, and this has been the Doc Sounds of Science podcast. This show is available wherever you get your podcasts, or you can stream it off our website, doc.govt.nz. This show is produced by Jane Ramage with editing by Lucy Holyoke. If you enjoyed this episode, show us some love with a 5-star rating.